We can proceed. Once again, Jonathan Savoy is still going through the introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is Jonathan Savoy again with the Nunavut Planning Commission. I hope everyone had a nice lunch break and made it back. We're going to continue our review with Chapter 3 on the goal of encouraging conservation planning. As I noted this morning, the Nunavut Planning Commission does not have jurisdiction within fully established national and territorial parks, as well as fully established national marine conservation areas. But we do still have jurisdiction within those areas as they're going through the process of being established, as well as still having jurisdiction within established conservation areas, including things like national wildlife areas and migratory bird sanctuaries. So this chapter is about supporting this goal of encouraging conservation planning, and we'll similarly go through each topic in turn with the associated maps. The first subsection on slide 35 is for future national and territorial parks. It's important to note that many of Nunavut's territorial parks in particular are not yet fully established. So many of these areas have signage and websites, and many people think they are fully and finally established, but there is still outstanding paperwork and agreements to be reached. So many of the yellow dots shown on the left-hand side of this slide correspond to relatively small territorial parks that are not yet fully established. They are all included in the 2021 Draft Nunavut Land Use Plan as limited use areas with year-round prohibitions on several, mostly industrial activities, again, including mineral exploration and production, oil and gas, as well as things like hydroelectric power generation and quarries. The most significant area within the southern Baffin region is, of course, Katanalik Territorial Park along the Soper River, south of Iqaluit and north of Kimmirut. There are some proposed territorial parks within the region, further north, including the Agutini Territorial Park near Clyde River, as well as the fossil forests on Axel Heiberg Island that are being considered as potential territorial parks. Those are also included as limited use designations in the current draft. There are currently no proposed national parks within Nunavut, but there are small portions that are still awaiting full incorporation into existing national parks. The right-hand side of this slide shows the proposed National Marine Conservation Area in Lancaster Sound and the surrounding areas, or Taluriat Emenga National Marine Conservation Area. This important area, once it's fully established, will also no longer be within the jurisdiction of the Nunavut Land Use Plan, but at this time that agreement is not yet finalized, and it's included as a limited use designation in the draft plan. slide 36 shows on the left-hand side national wildlife areas. These are established conservation areas managed by Environment and Climate Change Canada. There are a few of these areas in the region, in particular around the community of Iqaluit. They are included as limited use designations in the draft plan, with year-round prohibitions on that same list of industrial activities, as well as setback requirements around some important features within the existing wildlife areas. Similarly, on the right-hand side of the slide, we see migratory bird sanctuaries throughout the territory. In particular, north of Kingate, there's a large bird sanctuary, and these are also included as limited use designations with year-round prohibitions as well as setback requirements from important bird habitat. This is another area of the land use plan where there has been some disagreement on the recommended approach for the land use plan in dealing with the areas. Commissioners chose to include the limited use designation as supported by some participants, and others have noted that the inclusion of year-round prohibitions in the draft plan in a limited use designation may go beyond what was contemplated in the existing Inuit impact agreements, and that this is inappropriate, and that the land use plan should instead pass all of these project proposals onto the existing area co-management committees for their consideration. And as with all issues, the Commission looks forward to any further feedback on this and other topics. Slide 37 deals on the left-hand side with historic sites. And we like to point out that this by no means represents the extent of historic or cultural sites within the territory, but in this chapter we're only referring to national historic sites as well as territorial historic sites that are established under legislation. There are several of these locations shown as green dots. They're generally smaller locations, not able to be seen at this scale, but they are included in the draft plan, again, as limited use designations with year-round restrictions on many activities. The right-hand side of this slide shows Canadian heritage rivers. Again, this is not representative of all rivers of cultural significance in the territory, but only those identified under the Canadian Heritage Rivers system. Here in the Iqaluit region, there is one Canadian Heritage River. That's the Soper River near Iqaluit. In this case, we talked about Katanalik Territorial Park being centered around the Soper River. But we would like to note that in the case of the management plan for the Soper River, it identifies the importance of the entire watershed or area that collects water that flows in the Soper River. And the Commission has chosen to identify the portion of the Soper River watershed that lies beyond Katanalik Territorial Park as a limited use designation with those same sorts of limited use area, same sort of prohibited uses. Once again, there's a range of views on this area, including support for a limited use designation, as well as concerns that the inclusion of this limited use area, again, goes beyond what was contemplated with the Canadian Heritage River Management Plan, which does not have what we call regulatory teeth or effect. So land users in the area are not required to follow any particular guidance. Nonetheless, the Commission has heard from participants of the importance of these rivers and has proposed different management approaches depending on the management plan for each river. So I won't go through the other heritage river approaches in the other regions, but they are different depending on the guidance provided in their respective management plans. On the next slide, 38, we have the Thalon Wildlife Sanctuary in the Kivalliq and Kitikmeot. That's included as a limited use designation. I'll just note for reference. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, we have marine protected areas that are being proposed or considered under the Oceans Act. So these are particular conservation areas that are able to be established by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and there are currently none within Nunavut, but there are two initiatives underway. One that's more advanced off the northern shore of Ellesmere and Axel Heiberg Island, sometimes referred to as the last ice area. This area is included as a valued component, and discussions are still ongoing regarding the future management of this area. In addition, more recently, the area around Southampton Island in the Kivalliq region has been identified as a study area, and that is also included as a valued component for consideration by project proponents and other regulatory authorities. That concludes Chapter 3, Encouraging Conservation Planning. I think some of the more relevant areas here in the southern Baffin region would be the Kitanalik Territorial Park and some historic sites, as well as the Soper River watershed. Chapter 4 is a very important part of the land use plan that supports the goal of building healthier communities, generally, as well as the concerns within Chapter 2, conservation issues in Chapter 3. Chapter 4 focuses on areas identified by community